Hello and welcome into Cubs on Deck, episode number 4. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by Greg Zumak. Greg, how's it going, man?
Hey, it's going all right. It's snowy winter Midwest that I'm now back in and need to like fully embrace or at least tolerate. But you know what? It's been a hot off season to talk about prospects, some MLB draft stuff, the system in general. So it warms my heart and keeps keeps us all ready to get ready for the spring. So
Heck yeah, I was able to slip in that this is episode 4 here. I feel like early on, like I'm able to remember what episode it is, and I've been putting the episode number on the meeting invites here, so that I can say that, because I feel like once we get up in the higher numbers, I'm going to completely lose track of what number we're on here. But this is episode 4. We're kind of hitting our stride here. We've had Brian on 2 episodes, and now Greg, you're on for the second episode here, and you're right. Like it's kind of like we're planning on getting some interviews on as this offseason wears on, but it's been kind of fun, kind of just hitting on things that we want to talk about. I know that you and I went into some prospect lists before. There's been plenty of Rule 5 talk, but really some just like hot items. And I know that we've kind of been posting these every other week, and it's been kind of going well so far. So today we are releasing, actually, Zumak, we're recording this episode before Christmas. It's really difficult to record during the holidays, obviously, but this episode, for everybody out there listening, you'll be listening to it after Christmas and before the New Year's, which is leads to the kind of the premise of this entire episode, which is that we are going to be doing New Year's resolutions for the Cubs farm system. So that's what this entire episode is going to be comprised of. We're going to get into some New Year's resolutions for specific players. We're going to talk about some New Year's resolutions for the system as a whole. But this should be fun, man. I'm excited. I wrote an article a couple of years ago over at Cubs Insider, and I interviewed players. And with those interviews, I asked what their baseball resolutions were. And so I published that. This is a little bit different, where we're not talking to players. This is just more or less from a fan's perspective, which is what we are. So I don't know, man. Anything you want to get into before we dig right into these New Year's resolutions for the system?
The only thing that I think we gotta mention here is some of kind of the updates really quickly, and the fact that there still could be some changes. It is entirely possible that by the time all you folks listen to this after the holidays or in between the holidays, depending on how you view that there may even be some more changes. But we did see the addition of Dansby Swanson. We're not going to get into the majors, but it does have some other ramifications to it too. That it had some slight decreases in the IFA spending, international free agency, and a second round pick. I was getting some messages, some DMs that were basically like, "Hey, you love the draft. Like, isn't this a bad thing?" And I was like, "No, I mean, no." So just as a reminder, if you look back on like the last 5 to 6 years, the average second round pick, right around where the Cubs were picking, puts up about 2 wins above replacement over the course of their first 5 years in the majors. That also accounts for the people who don't make it. So no, not really going to miss that for the type of guys that like Dansby Swanson or some of these other shortstops. And I know these aren't all the same things, but hey, the Cubs are making some moves, and those moves do have trickle down effects for the rest of the system. And so hopefully some of those will kind of factor into some of our New Year's resolutions. And I'm excited to jump right in.
Yeah, I know. So last episode number 3, Brian and I spent the good chunk of that episode digging into what the system looks like based on the idea that the Cubs don't go out and sign a major league free agent shortstop, one of the big 4. And after we recorded, we kind of realized, like, if you guys haven't listened to that, you can still go back and listen. I don't think that episode is no longer relevant because the Cubs signed Dansby Swanson. It's just kind of a deep dive into those infield prospects that the Cubs have throughout the system. And so it's still relevant. If you guys are still curious about the depth that the Cubs have in the system in terms of shortstop and second base and a little bit of third base, then go back and check out that episode. But like I said, I don't think that episode goes by the wayside just because the Cubs signed Dansby, which I am all about. But we won't get into the Dansby Swanson signing. There's plenty of other places you can go listen to podcasts to talk about the Dansby Swanson signing. In the meantime, I think I'll lead things off here with a New Year's resolution that actually does revolve around the Major League team a little bit. So we are not a Major League podcast, but if there's a prospect in the major leagues, we are about that life. So I'm going to lead off with a New Year's resolution of Matt Mervis cementing himself as a major league starting first baseman. And I make that. I think it's important to start off with this resolution because Matt Mervis is maybe the most. Matt Mervis is the most talked about prospect that we've had in a decade plus for a guy that's not the top prospect in the system. I think I feel like fans just love talking about Matt Mervis, and I understand the logic, I understand the reason behind it, but it's we've had plenty of different conversations revolving around Matt Mervis and what he is as a prospect, what we have set our expectations for him moving forward. But as far as resolutions go, how huge and how important would it be for this organization to have Matt Mervis next year cement himself as the first baseman of the future? And that I'm very careful about the way I'm wording that resolution because I'm not saying that Matt Mervis needs to go out and put up a 900 OPS next year. I'm not saying
not asking.
I'm not asking that. I'm not saying he needs to go put up 30 home runs. I'm not saying that he even needs to play the entire year in Chicago. I'm just very carefully making a resolution that come 20 this time next year that we know Matt Mervis is the first baseman in Chicago moving forward. We're confident in what he is as a prospect, or as a not even as a prospect anymore, but as a player. And I think there's a lot of ways he can go about doing that, but I'm very excited to see him do that this year.
Yeah, I love that, man. That's great. I mean, you started New Year's resolution 1 off with first base. I think that's awesome. And I mean, you're right. Like Mervis's impact is huge, right? So first of all, we're talking about at a low cost. We're also talking about the fact that it locks down a position for you for the foreseeable future. And you know, it tells us that breakout is real, and everything that Mervis was doing was exciting. Like he kept improving his K percentage as he got higher, right? Like he was just showing you the kind of things. And yeah, he can hit a fastball, you know, whatever. We'll just leave it at that. So like, yes, I love it, man. I think that's good. Can I piggyback? I'm not going to make a resolution off of this, but can I piggyback that I fingers crossed I'm watching this like a hawk to see if Matt Mervis ends up on any top 100 lists. But if he ends up on 2 of 3 of ESPN's, Baseball America, and MLB Pipelines, he would be eligible for the prospect promotion incentive, which means that, hey, we just saw this with J-Rod of the Mariners, and Mervis is not J-Rod. But if a player is eligible for that, so they're on 2 of 3 of these top 100 lists, and they start the year very, very quickly within the majors, win the Rookie of the Year, that team wins a first-round pick. It's a win-win incentive. And just to totally go back to yours, that doesn't mean he has to do that. It doesn't mean it all rides on Mervis. You were very careful in your wording. Can I be a little bit more selfish and say that would be awesome for me coming from the draft perspective? But hey, man, I'm all in on that. I think that's a great resolution to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I think that, I guess I'll toss it to you. What as we stand here at the end of December, what do you put, and I know there's plenty more action to go on in the free agent market, in the trade market, things like that. With the roster as it stands right now, what do you think the odds that, in terms of a percentage, that Matt Mervis begins the year in Chicago on opening day?
Honestly, kind of high. I really do. Whether he's eligible for that or not, I think they just want to see what they have going with him. And it's not like anybody is blocking him or looks like will block him. Like it's possible they'll sign like a Trey Mancini. I know we don't want to get too much into free agency, but that doesn't mean that there aren't still at bats there. So I'd say fairly high, I guess. I'm just kind of banking on that a little bit. The wording from Jed Hoyer earlier in the offseason was very strong for him. It makes sense why he's not on the 40-man now, because the Cubs are very selfish about those 40-man spots. But like, I'll say, as long as he's healthy, at least within the first week, I'll say that like 80%, 85% even.
I think I'm pretty close to that. I don't see this. This is not with Matt Mervis. This is not. I've reiterated this several times. Like this is not a Chris Bryant situation where they're going to hold him down for any. Even if it's not dealing with the rookie of the year draft pick, he's on 2 prospect lists. Like even if we're not dealing with all of that nonsense, or not nonsense, but craziness, this is not a Chris Bryant situation where like you're holding him down for like contract situations or years of control. Like, because Matt Mervis is not a top 10 prospect in all of baseball. And I love Matt Mervis. I think I'm high on him. I believe in what he could be as a major league player, but like he's not Chris Bryant. He's not a service time manipulation candidate. And yeah, I'm excited to see what he does next year, even if it is starting in Iowa to begin the year, which I don't think it will be, again, as of right now. But I'm excited regardless of the situation.
Yep, I'm with you, man.
All right, you want to go to your first resolution here?
Totally. So I'm gonna have back-to-backs on the same player, but I think he's just really important for the overall system, and that's DJ Herz. And so my first resolution for DJ is just establish a breaking ball. We've seen what DJ can do just based off of his fastball. He's flirted with kind of a curveball in the past, and he still throws it. But it's heavily that fastball changeup, and it plays really, really well. But ultimately, I think for him to continue as a starter and to be that like high ceiling starter that we've been talking about, it's establishing that breaking ball. I go back and forth as to whether that's just firming up the curveball or it's actually setting up a slider. And I will be very curious to see what the Cubs do and how they utilize that crossfire delivery is something that I think is very helpful for DJ. But from a pitch design standpoint, this is just my interpretation of it. I think it makes it very challenging for the Cubs to put all the data in the computer and spit something out that actually works. Whereas they can take guys who throw far more over the top or have more like inline mechanics, that they've just got a lot of data that says, all right, this guy's a good candidate for a slider, sweeper slider. This guy's a good candidate for this. And I think DJ is just harder, but that also makes it where he's much harder to hit. So I think he locks down something in the breaking ball variety. I will guess it's a slider actually this year. And I think it's going to really, really help him take off. Even if it's just an average pitch, I think it's going to make the others play off really well.
I think you nailed it with it. It makes the others play up. The fastball that DJ has is not something that's sitting mid 90s, right? He's in the lower 90s with the fastball, but by itself it plays up because of the crossfire delivery, because the way that he delivers the pitch. So to batters it looks like it's coming in mid to high 90s as opposed to low 90s, And I think if he can use, and he's already using the changeup to keep guys honest, but if he can also use a slider to keep guys honest, then it completely changes the type of pitcher that he is, even if he stays down in the low 90s. I'm kind of expecting him to bump up a few ticks this offseason in terms of velo on the fastball, but even if we're not expecting that to happen, even if he's sticking in the low 90s, to have that a changeup that he can pair against righties with the fastball, and then also a slider against lefties, that we know how difficult he is on lefties already because of that crossfire delivery. But any way that he can make that fastball play up is a plus, and it gives him an additional way to attack hitters by incorporating that slider. Because you're right, it's just kind of up to this point, it's been every once in a while he'll break off a breaking ball, and I'm again careful with my words to describe it as a breaking ball, because is it curveball, is it a slider, like what is it? I don't know, but every once in a while he'll break off one of those puppies, and I'm like, oh, like that's nice. Like he'll against a righty put it on their back foot, and it's like, oh my god, like where is, like, give me more of that. But if he can just be a little bit more consistent, if the shape can be more consistent, like, and the consistency is more than just like locating where he wants to locate it, but it's like the shape consistency, and giving himself the confidence to throw it in more than just a put away counts. If he can put that out there as a 1-1 count, as opposed to it has to be a 0-2 count, makes a big difference. So yeah, that's a big thing with DJ. I'm excited you brought that up.
Yeah, I'm excited for him this year, and as you'll see in my next resolution, I'll kind of piggyback right off of there, no pun intended, with the pitching discussion. But yeah, I'm excited for DJ, and I think this is the year that he starts putting a bunch of stuff really well.
And actually, we had said before we started recording that we just bounce back and forth between you and me. I think, honestly, I think it might work better. You want to just go ahead and give your next resolution because it also pertains to DJ
Totally.
Herz?
Yeah, I've been teasing it well enough here. But, DJ's probably other foible, if you will, his one kind of flaw is the fact that the walks are still there. He came into last season with the goal. We put that in the System on the Rise piece on Northside Bound, which you should definitely follow. But he wanted to keep the walks under control a little bit, and ultimately, like, it didn't quite get there. I think this is the year that he does. I think he takes the walks down a considerable amount. And so my goal for DJ is to just, lower his walk per 9, to a more average level, or even slightly above average, as in slightly higher than you want to, because that's still a really big play for DJ.
Yeah, he's all about stuff. Like, DJ's all about stuff, and which is, again, I'll go back to the fact that his fastball isn't like super crazy high velo, because I feel like when you associate stuff with a guy, like, you immediately go to high 90s fastball, wipeout slider. Like, that's where my mind goes to when I'm thinking stuff. And DJ has neither of those things, really. He has neither of those things, and I still associate him with being a big stuff guy, which is wild. So with big, like, nasty offerings, you don't need to have a walk rate of like 5%. Like, that doesn't need to happen. You can have a walk rate higher than 5%. You just can't have a walk rate of 15%. It has to fall somewhere within that range, closer to the 5 than the 15 I'd prefer. But yeah, like, when you have swing and miss stuff, especially when it's chase stuff, like when guys, and that might be a big thing, right? Where the walk rate can lower if he incorporates that slider that you mentioned in the New Year's resolution number 1 for DJ Herz. If he can get that swing and miss out of the zone with the slider, then batters are taking fewer pitches out of the zone. That walk rate lowers. So it's not always about throwing more strikes in the zone to lower the walk rate. Sometimes it's about getting more swings and misses on pitches out of the zone to lower the walk rate. And I think that he needs to work on a little bit of both of those things. I do need to see more pitches in the zone. And with that, if we see more pitches in the zone with DJ, he will lower the pitch count. The pitch count won't get as crazy high in the 4th inning. And so we won't need to be talking about this piggyback, is he a reliever, all that action. It can just be, okay, he's going deeper in starts. He's throwing more strikes. He's walking fewer guys. We're good.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I really love your point about effectively throwing more pitches out of the zone by designs, things like sweeper sliders and stuff, in an effort to actually throw more strikes. I mean, it's true. We do see that with some pitchers, that they actually need to do that. So, yeah, I mean, I think his command needs to take a step forward, and I think it will. I think it's a foot plant issue, and that just takes more reps and etc. But yeah, I mean, he's just a couple steps away from being that, like, really, really top line pitcher. And he's already a bulldog on the mound. So yeah, I'm really excited for DJ. I think this is a year that he already had a good season. They had a very good season. I think he has a very, very good season too. Maybe a great season next year.
If he accomplishes both of those 2 resolutions you've just made, I mean, he's one of the top pitching prospects in the system, easy, if he accomplishes both those things. Those are 2 major things with DJ.
Because he's still super young, and would be in the upper majors or minors. So I mean, you're talking about a guy who's he would be like 21 in AA or AAA, and locating pitches and throwing 3 above average to better offerings. Oh yeah, he'd be.
Sign me up.
He's top 5 pitcher.
I'm all about it. All right, man. We're going to pivot off of DJ Herz, but stick in the pitching category here with the New Year's resolution and go with mine is that we see one starting pitcher break out in Myrtle Beach this year, outside of Cade Horton. Because I know that last episode we dug into Cade Horton. Will he be assigned to Myrtle Beach? Will he be assigned to South Bend? I'm hedging the bets here and saying that I'm taking Cade Horton out of the equation. He's already a 1st-round draft pick. He's already a top 10 prospect. He's not part of this. But with all the talent the Cubs have in terms of pitching, especially at like AA, I mean, throughout the system, but especially like the upper levels, but especially at AA. I mean, Double A is going to be insane in terms of the starting rotation. Jordan Wicks and Ben Brown and Luis Devers and Daniel Palencia and DJ Herz. And I mean, they're going to have 6 legitimate starting pitchers in Tennessee. What we haven't seen a whole lot of are starting pitcher prospects coming up through like the Arizona Complex League last year. There's been at those rookie levels not a whole lot of starting pitcher talent in terms of like international free agent signings, and they've been the signings in terms of the draft have been really interesting because you've had kind of higher upside guys in Drew Gray and Cohen Moreno and Jackson Ferris and even like Dom Hambly to a certain degree from the draft a couple of years back. But we just haven't seen these guys, whether they were higher draft picks or lesser spoken of international free agents. We just haven't seen them like really prove anything yet. And part of that is they haven't been to full season ball yet. But we just don't have the same level of confidence entering the 2023 campaign in terms of starting pitchers down at Myrtle Beach. So again, my resolution is just to have one of these guys. And I don't have anybody in mind particularly to break out, but we need to see one Myrtle Beach guy at least break out.
I love it. I am going to throw out a couple names, though. These are my breakout pitchers in my draft ranking, or not draft rankings, apologies, but my rankings for NSB. Mason McGuire and Kenji Perez. And, you know, I've heard a few things on Kenji Perez, but most of it I've heard is basically like, you're going to love him. He's awesome. I know Brian has heard even more. And so he's got probably more information. So I don't want to steal any thunder because I'm sure his rankings are going to come out and he'll have a lot more information on it. I'll just say that, like, when I asked around, I had heard like, hey, he's somebody you really, really need to watch. And like I said, I know Brian's heard a lot more. So fellow co-host Brian Smith can maybe fill people in a little bit more on him. I have posted a recent video on him and just from something from his Instagram, but dang, the stats don't look really good. Don't worry about that. That's really low level stuff. But the stuff is big. And then Mason McGuire, I just kept asking around and everybody's in the system is like, oh yeah, like he's taken to things really, really well. Super smooth mechanics. He's up to 94. He's throwing multiple pitches. He's got that splitter, which is always really interesting. And yeah, I'll just be kind of bullish on him. I think he's going to start or be up to Myrtle Beach very quickly. And I think he has a really big year. But yeah, I love it, dude. I think you captured it really well amongst the group of Jackson Ferris, Drew Gray, Mason McGuire, Kenji Perez. We've got Cole Moreno, perhaps. There's somebody's breaking out. I love it. And let's have some big seasons.
Yeah, if I'm making a prediction, I'm gonna go with Drew Gray as the breakout here. Yeah. I mean, I just know like all the talk about the spin rates that he has on his pitches and just kind of the buzz around him right after he was drafted was no joke. And I'd like to go Jackson Ferris here, but I just don't know how much we'll see of him in Myrtle Beach next year. And so I'm kind of like, if I'm picking an IMG Academy guy, I guess I'll go with Drew Gray in his return from surgery. And there's a lot of guys that just like they just pique my interest. They pique, like I'm intrigued, but it's like we need to see that, and especially like the pitching staff in Myrtle will not. It cannot be what it was last year. Like it just can't because it was the amount of success we saw out of that Myrtle Beach rotation that all got bumped up to South Bend between Luke Little and Luke Little and Porter Hodge, and I'm putting myself on the spot, Richard Gallardo and a few others, right? The entire rotation from Myrtle Beach got bumped up to South Bend, and not just because of like age or because of like, they were doing decent. It's because they're all dominating that level. I don't know if I mentioned Luke Little.
You did. Yeah, I think you did. But yeah, he's another perfect example.
Yeah, and so like we're not going to see that. Like that's not. But we do need to see guys continuing to trickle through the system. I've said so many times that like the difference between this rebuild for the Cubs and leading up to the 2016 World Series rebuild is that one was built on, let's just get this group of guys that can be very successful all at the same time. And this rebuild has been completely different by the way they've gone about doing it, where let's try to be successful at calling up prospects to the big leagues, a few of them every single year, kind of like what the Dodgers do every single year. And part of that is you need to continue developing pitchers and hitters at the lower levels, because they don't just show up in Iowa and Tennessee and like they're ready to be poached to the major league roster. Like, it happens all throughout the system, and so we can't have any type of gaps at any level. The system has to be impressive all across the board. And right now, like, that's the biggest gap that I see in terms of like unproven things that are unproven, is that pitching staff in the lowest levels.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, they did enough to address that probably from the draft, I think, between the past 2 years that I agree. I think that they have set themselves up really well. Are we going to see a repeat of last year's Myrtle Beach? No. I mean, the ceiling is higher, though. I mean, Jackson Ferris is no joke. I had a first-round grade on him. He was like the 21st, I think, overall ranked prospect for me. Now, granted, I'll admit that I didn't have Horton as high. He was in like the 30s and 40s. I really hadn't caught up, and I didn't provide updates to my rankings outside of the top 15 up until the draft. So he's a guy that is probably a little bit higher, but many people would argue that they got 2 first-round pitchers out of it. So you took Horton out of it, and I think that's fair. But yeah, that staff could be no joke, and it would really go a long way to address, I would say, one of the more significant gaps in the system. Though maybe my next resolution will address one of my biggest concerns from a gap in the system standpoint.
Yeah, let's go ahead and transition to that. To your,
it's almost like we
next
planned
resolution. That. Yeah, it's perfect. It's almost as if we have notes here. Yeah, let's go ahead and transition to your next resolution and that next group of positions.
My resolution is first and foremost that multiple catchers step forward within the system in this next year. It is finally the return, hopefully, knock on wood. This is literally a wood desk. That Miguel Amaya comes back fairly healthy. For the fans that are saying, hey, maybe that's why the Cubs aren't really going big at catcher, I don't think that's the case. We can't rely on Miguel Amaya. My resolution is that he does come back fairly healthy, shows he can be a contributor. He still has high, potential, but this is a guy that hasn't caught since basically 2019. I know there was a handful of opportunities in 2020 at the alternate site, and that's about it. But between that and the Tommy John surgery later, he basically hasn't caught consistently since 2019. I'd like to see that this is the year that he comes back fairly strong, shows that he can apply things both offensively and defensively. But I did say catchers, and I really want somebody, multiple even potentially, of these catchers to start to step forward. We've got some guys with some pretty big potential, but they do have questions. Ballesteros, big bad. I was really impressed with him when I saw him down in Arizona. Like, he was hanging with he was actually hanging with a first-round pick in Gunnar Hoagland, who was coming back from Tommy John. He had gotten traded down to Oakland, and it was an interesting at bat, actually. I thought he was more impressive than I thought. He still struck out, but it was pretty good. And he's got some potential, but is he going to last behind the plate? I don't have the answers for that. So I'd like to see what he can do. Bryce Wyndham is a dude that if you ask around, like, everybody loves Bryce Wyndham. Like, Bryce gets rave reviews. I love Bryce, and I've seen what he can do, like, behind the plate. He's also shown flashes offensively of being like a really strong, like, walk contributor as well. Not a ton of power, but like, if we're talking backup catcher, like that's a really valuable person there. So yeah,
Bryce Wyndham. I know you have more, but I'll interrupt on the Bryce Wyndham train, because I've said before, if he can just show any bit of power, like putting on some more muscle and show any, like, I'm not even talking like I'm not even referring to like putting up double-digit home runs. Like, that's not even what I'm talking about. I'm saying like putting the ball deep into the gaps, like show any like resemblance of power, then that completely changes like who he is at the plate, because he put up, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was like a top 3 walk rate in the entire farm system, and a top 3, like a top 3 strikeout rate in terms of like lowest strikeout rate in the farm system. Like, outrageous numbers in terms of the walking and striking out. And that's something that I always look for in a player. but you always have to incorporate like how like the quality of contact they're making. And Bryce just wasn't making quality contact. I mean, he was putting the ball in play. It just wasn't hard in any way, shape, or form. But man, like I believe in the bat if he can just add some strength and power. It's like because I really think he can take off in a big way. And like you alluded to, obviously he's in good standing in the system in terms of like the way he like the development staff believing in him, the coaching staff believing in him, his pitchers believing in him, because he's still like he's made it up to Tennessee without having any type of hitting to speak for in terms of batting average and power. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of interrupt on Wyndham because he's so interesting to me. So interesting to me.
It's true. And like I've had people question me on this, but I've been asked before in like Q&As and stuff like that, who is like the Cubs backup catcher in the future? And it's kind of a niche little question. It's funny, but I've multiple times said Bryce Wyndham because I swear like we're just going to look up and all of a sudden he's going to pop off for like 12 home runs all of a sudden, like randomly. And the numbers look decent enough. And he ends up just getting called up as a fill-in and then kind of sticks around and has like a pretty solid career. Like I legitimately just think that's going to happen.
He's a freak athlete too.
Oh my God, yeah, and he can make plays at second base. He can do things, and I still have some video posted. I think it was a Max Bain was pitching at the time, but Bryce gunned a guy down to second. That I literally, I said this in the tweet, but I went back because I thought the runner had tripped. Like I thought the runner had tripped or slowed down or like it was a hit and run. And then they showed the replay and he did not. He was running full speed and he threw him up by like a mile. Like it was crazy. It was just perfect. So I mean, he just has those other intangibles. And of course, on a day, spoiler alert for what day this is, on a day where the Cubs are potentially signing a guy heavily on the soft skills factor, like Bryce Wyndham has that. And so, yeah, he needs to show more, of course, but like, I don't know. I believe in Bryce Wyndham, and 2023 could be a great year for him. But we've got some other guys: Ethan Hearn, Pablo Aliendo. Don't want to get too far deep into it. Point is, we've got a whole bunch of guys that are pretty solid. They all have potential to step forward.
One of the reasons why I was so like there was no chance that the Cubs would re-sign Wilson Contreras. And I was full on believing all the rumors swirling around that the Cubs were interested in going the route of like a game manager, the soft skills, like all of that good stuff behind the plate, was because I looked at the farm system and the system is littered with those guys. Bryce Wyndham is that. Pablo Aliendo is absolutely that. Ethan Hearn is that to a definition. Like if you look up those soft skills, like that's Ethan Hearn. You know, the system is loaded up with those players. Like we've had Eric Castillo. I know he's a minor league free agent now, but we had Eric Castillo in the system for quite some time. Yeah, it's just like Casey Opitz is that guy as well. Like it's just the system is loaded with those types of players. So like when all those rumors are swirling, like, oh, that's the route the Cubs want to go. It's like, okay, yeah, because that's all they have in their entire system, you know? And this position, I love this resolution by you. I mean, because this position is when people ask, like, oh, like what's the catching look like in the system? It's like I'm never gonna be like, oh, the catching's good. Like it's really, really impressive. But there's a whole bunch of dudes that I'm like, there's a whole bunch of guys that I want to mention first when talking about the position group, right? Like I want to talk about Ethan Hearn and like what could Ethan Hearn be? I always want to talk about him first. We just gushed about Bryce Wyndham for 10 minutes and like he's a guy who batted under 200 this year, but like there's reason why we're gushing about him. You know, like there's so many guys I want to speak about first, and that's a good problem to have. I'm not saying this is a position of strength in the system because it is most definitely not in terms of offensive production or anything like that.
It's not. And sorry, go ahead.
But I just dig it. I dig it, and I think the resolution fits this position very well.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too deep into it, because I think we'll explore this in a different way here very soon for Northside Bound. But yeah, like they clearly do believe in the soft skills, and there have been opportunities where the Cubs could have potentially addressed catcher. One of them was the draft, right? Like there was like Kevin Parada was sitting there, or Daniel Susac. Like that doesn't mean that the Cubs wouldn't explore that in the future. I think they will, but there have been opportunities where the Cubs could choose where they wanted to allocate their resources, and they've said, we're a believer in the soft skills. We're going to allocate them different ways. We can debate whether that's good or bad, and we won't know, for years down the line. They're not the only organization that does it. Houston's one of them. they're doing things pretty well. So I guess we'll see. But yeah, man, I'm with you. I think multiples take a step forward. Let's see what people can do. Because there's a whole bunch of guys that I want to really like believe in.
Let's go from a couple position groups, the pitchers, the lower levels, and the catchers throughout the system that are maybe lacking and we want to see take off, to a position group that the Cubs have just done a phenomenal job of handling over the past pushing 5 years at this point now, and that is developing relievers. So my next New Year's resolution here is that the reliever development train does not slow down. We don't see that slow down, and that is when I talked earlier about like the importance of continuing to call up guys that make an impact every single year. This is a good example. Like all these successes that we've seen as guys have been called up, the Brandon Hughes of the world, the Jeremiah Estradas, but then also like the veteran free agent signings. Those are all very, very important, and they've been impressive up to this point, but it can't stop. And I don't foresee it stopping. And looking at the way that the system is set up right now, in terms of like that talent in the bullpen at the upper levels of the minors, I'm looking at like Ben Leeper has been on people's radar, and I'm excited. I think that he ran into some tough luck last year. You look at what Ben Leeper did a year ago, and he was actually really, obviously he wasn't 2021 version of Ben Leeper, but that was insane. He was still pretty damn good in 2022. He just ran into some tough luck sometimes. Dennis Correa is obviously really impressive. Cam Sanders in that move to the bullpen could be huge and pay big dividends in the big leagues. We're seeing up in the upper levels, Bailey Horn is now up there. Zach Lee is up there. There's some really impressive talent, and it can't stop. So I'm excited to see those guys and what they can do in Chicago, but I'm also excited to see what kind of develops in the lower levels in terms of relief prospects, because that's what the Cubs have kind of pivoted to in recent years, is like developing true relief prospects, as opposed to like, and then any guy that was a starting pitcher that's converted to the bullpen is just extra, that's extra icing on the cake, but like they're developing true relief prospects. And I mean, I think we saw that a year ago, like this past year, with Adam Lasky and Sheldon Reed are two guys that really jumped off the page as, okay, these might be dudes in the upper levels of the minors and all the way up to Chicago. But that ability to call up young guys and stick them in in your bullpen and watch them have success, that's so huge because they're cheap. I mean, from a organization perspective, like they can get you wins, they can save you some games, but also you don't have to spend $12 million a year on a relief pitcher. You can allocate that money to a big bopper at the plate, and then just rely on some flamethrowers and some guys that have some serious quirks, and I mean that in the best way possible, out of the bullpen as they rise up to the system.
Yeah, man. I mean, the train's been great. There were so many years where, if we think back to, I always go back to like the Cardinals, because the Cardinals would just annoy the bejesus out of me, right? And I'm not alone in that. They would come up with guys that have obviously made up names. I've never seen Lars Nootbaar in real life. I firmly believe that this is just a glitch in the matrix. He does not exist. This is not a real person. But like that, and he's actually really good, and I'm just totally being facetious here. But like, they have these guys come up, and of course Tommy Edman has a 6-win season, right? Of course Lars Nootbaar looks like a great, outfielder or whatever. And of course that year after year, getting back to your point, they're just bringing up these dudes that are just like, oh my God, they're shutting you down in the 6th, 7th, 8th inning. They paid nothing for them. And maybe they were a former starting pitcher, in the minors or whatever. But like, point is that they developed these guys, and the train was just never off the track. It was constantly rolling. And that is what the Cubs have been building. There's a few names too we haven't even talked about who had huge years in 2021, kind of like Leeper, but then didn't have so much luck, maybe due to injuries. Relievers are fickle. In 2022, Scott Kobos, like that guy made it all the way up to AAA.
Yeah,
and that's somebody that if you told me next season he's all the way in the majors, Brendan Little continuing in the majors. We haven't talked about Jeremiah Estrada, who made his debut, but like that guy's got legit like closer stuff. They're building this group the last draft kind of leaned a little bit more towards starters, but like honestly, there's some guys who could relieve. And no, I'm not talking about Cade Horton, but like Will Frisch, Brandon Birdsell. Like it'll depend what they want to do with them. But yeah, they've got like a group of relievers coming up, and yeah, keep the train growing every year. I want them just keep adding to this group. Add to this group.
You mentioned Scott Kobos. Another guy, almost identical situation as Scott Kobos, was Kane Ukert, who,
yes,
I mean, he had an incredible 2021 season.
Yep.
Really struggled in 22, but like, would you be shocked if he came back in 23 and killed it? I wouldn't.
No,
I look at almost. I think that's the best way to look at it, right? Is I look at almost every single reliever in the Cubs system, from Myrtle Beach up to Iowa, and if you were like, you know what, they're gonna have a really good year in 23, I'd be like, okay, I believe you. Like, you know, like, and that is, first of all, that's wild to imagine. Like, that's wild to think about. And second of all, it's incredibly important. I look at Manny Rodriguez and him being added to the 40-man roster a couple of years back and showing up, and like he had the high 90s fastball and everyone was freaking out, right? They're like, hey, we finally produced a guy that is throwing gas out of the bullpen. And now if Manny Rodriguez ends up having like needing to be DFA'd to make room for Tucker Barnhart or whoever, this might happen between now and when this episode airs. But if Manny Rodriguez needs to be DFA'd for one of these free agent signings, is it the end of the world? No. And that is a testament to the way that the Cubs have built their relievers in their system.
Yeah. And, you know, I know that the flyer type deals aren't sexy, you know, but Ronas Elias was a recent lefty that they just picked up. And you see these guys that just Mark Leiter Jr., right? Like he was arguably their best reliever outside of the guys that they traded. And okay, that's a bit of a damning statement. as I kind of say it out loud, damning with faint praise, I think is more of what it is. But he was actually really good. They took this guy who doesn't even throw with velocity, and they made some tweaks. And obviously, he gets a bunch of credit for this. But it's like, oh dang, he's good. And Zips is projecting for like a 3 ERA. Like there are it's this whole group: Craig Breslow and co, Casey Jacobson, the Tommy Hotovy, this whole group they put together is really just killing it. And yeah, you have to develop an ace, right? Like that's kind of how you judge a system. But you know what? If every year they're pumping out 3, 4, 5 relievers that give you really quality stuff and a couple starters that are in the mix every year, honestly, that's really good. And yeah, I love it, man. I think that's a solid resolution.
If you can, instead of signing 4 relievers for a total of $25 million for a year, if you can have 4 prospects that are being paid league minimum, and then you can allocate that $25 million to a starting pitcher, it all works out. It all works out.
It's true. You know, they're not the Rays, right? Like, you don't need to moneyball it and say, I'm not saying this is you, but like, we're not saying that we need to moneyball it and it's, you know, how many wins can you get for how little? It's saying, hey, they should be spending a whole bunch every year, but also use your system to then go get all-stars, right? Like, build these guys out and then go get superstars. And yeah, they need to keep doing this and all that. And we're not getting into all that stuff. Another guy, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, but like, I don't want to get too deep into it, but Max Bain is taking some big steps forward. The stuff's still there, and I'm really digging what he's been doing with his off-speed stuff this offseason. Like, I'm still on the train there. I think Max Bain, if you told me that he debuted in the Cubs or another system in 2023 in the majors, I'm not going to be that shocked. I'd be pumped. I'm not going to be shocked.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see him converted as a full, like, working as a reliever. Would you be shocked to see him take off? Absolutely not. Nope. Absolutely not. Nope. So, all right, we're going from one position group that has been a positive over the last few years to another position group that is really a positive in the system. Injuries be damned, it's still a positive. The outfield group. So my next resolution is that the outfield prospects, especially the guys in the upper levels of the minors, put the Cubs in a position to be okay with losing Ian Happ in free agency next offseason. I know that there's been plenty of calls for extending Ian Happ. I think we're approaching a weird part of the Cubs fandom offseason that we're associating extend Ian Happ and extend Nico Horner in the same breath, and those things can be separate. Like we can need the Cubs to extend Nico Horner and be like okay with the Cubs extending Ian Happ. And those things, I'm worried they're all like being said at the same time now, and I don't like that. But my point is that because of Brennan Davis and Alexander Canario and Pete Crow Armstrong and some of these guys, I mean Owen Casey to a certain degree, some of these guys at the upper levels of the farm system can make it so that if Ian Happ just walks or is given the qualifying offer. Sorry, I was losing track of that. If he's given the qualifying offer and he declines it, then it's okay because Pete Crow Armstrong is there to save the day. And I say save the day, but like that's not even what I mean. Where it's like there's other guys that can fill in, and I know that the Cubs already have some talented players, and Seiya Suzuki's already up there. Cody Bellinger, you hope improves this year and it makes a deal in 2024 doable and makes sense for the Cubs. But my big thing is I just think the Cubs have really good outfield prospect depth, and I want that to be ready to roll come 2024. And losing Ian Happ, not the end of the world.
Yeah, and I really like your wording because I want to kind of put some emphasis on how you worded that because I think it was very smart. You didn't say junk Ian Happ to the curb. You said to basically that these guys go out there, they perform well enough that it puts you in a position where you don't have to. You could still extend Ian Happ. That's fine, right? You got the DH and left field, and he's a Gold Glover and like awesome, whatever. But you can also be in a position where it's not, if we don't extend this guy, we're sunk. And I think that that's what you always want your system to do, is to develop these things so that it doesn't back you into a corner at any spot. I'd say that there's some others that they probably are a little bit more backed into, but like left field is not the one. And with that outfield depth, you have PCA, Brennan, Canario. I know there's definitely some injuries there, like you mentioned. But guys that you can still believe in. You've got Jordan Wogu, who's probably going to be in Double-A, and I don't know, he's going to be Rule 5 eligible next year, so maybe they want to give him a run. Owen Casey will be in Double-A and stuff like that. So yeah, like there's enough there that like if this group can, which has been strong, sets them up into a position where they say, hey, we have multiple routes we can go, it can't hurt.
I think the whole purpose of building a successful, like the whole idea of building a successful organization is that in free agency, whether that is like getting a free agent that wasn't prior on your team or extending a guy that is on your team, the whole idea is that is just taking your team from good to great. And it's the same idea in terms of like trading for a major league talented player and giving up prospects. You want to take your team from good to great. What makes the team good is a successful farm system that you can call upon at the major league level. That is what makes your team good. What makes your team great is adding those extra good players, right? It's adding Dansby Swanson. That's taking your team hopefully to good. But like my point is that adding Dansby Swanson, extending Ian Happ, that makes your team great. And that's my goal here. I'm hoping that we see some PCA succeeding in Double-A and Triple-A this year. Maybe get a cup of coffee up in the bigs at the tail end of the season. We see Brennan Davis come back healthy. We see Alexander Canario at the end of the year come back healthy. Like all these things, like so that in come opening day 2024, the Cubs can say, you know what, like we're good with just putting PCA in center field. We're good with riding with Brennan Davis in left field. Like we're okay with these things. Alexander Canario as depth, okay. Like I'm game for that. So. That's just my whole idea. I think I'm glad you pointed out my wording in that, like, it's just, I'm okay with not having to like rely on extending Ian Happ. For what it's worth, I will take every single opportunity I'm ever given to say extend Nico Hoerner because he's the best. And I love Nico Hoerner, and seeing Nico Hoerner at second base and shortstop for the Cubs for many, many years, I'm all about. All right, man, I've got one more that's very all-encompassing of the entire system. Want me to go ahead and go for it?
Yep.
All right. Our final New Year's resolution here on the Cubs on Deck podcast is for by the end of the I guess it's not even by the end of the season. Just this year, the next calendar year, it's a New Year's resolution to have 5 top 100 prospects in the Chicago Cubs farm system. And I went about like kind of adding these guys up in a very certain, like very specific way. And my thinking with 5 is that like that really showcases that you have one of the best farm systems in baseball. If you get up to that number 5, right? Some team, like you see the Rays and Dodgers in years having 6 top 100 prospects. If you can get to 5, like you have a no joke, legit, like surefire top system in baseball. Not maybe not number 1, but like top 5. And that's all you need to be. You don't need to be number 1. You need to be top 5. And so I'll kind of run down some of these names, and Zumak, I'll let you kind of dig into the names as well. But my thinking is that you need either 3 or 4 of the following bats to be a top 100 guy. That's Brennan Davis, Pete Crow Armstrong, Kevin Alcantara. Those are really the top 3 prospects in the farm system right now. In addition to Owen Casey or Christian Hernandez really taking off and joining that top 100 crew. And then in that, you need 1 or 2 of the following pitchers to be bumped up to top 100 prospect status, which they are not right now. And that's Jordan Wicks, Cade Horton, Ben Brown, and Daniel Palencia is the group I'm looking at. So if you have 3 of the hitters and 2 of the pitchers, or 4 of the hitters and 1 of the pitchers, there you get your 5. And I think that it's not a ridiculous thing to go out there and predict this. It's a New Year's resolution for a reason, right? Like it's something that might be a little bit of a stretch. Me saying that I'm going to the gym every day for the next year for my New Year's resolution, I know it's going to be a real stretch if I can get there. It's probably not going to happen. That's why I label this as 5 guys. I don't know. Who do you think from that group? Do you think it's at all possible? What's your view of this?
5 you said by the end of the year, right?
Yeah. I think mid-season is probably a stretch, so I'm thinking it's more likely by the end of like the 24 season. But it also gets tricky, right? Because you got Brennan Davis might have exhausted rookie eligibility by the end of the season,
right? And that's where I'm trying to figure out. So top 100 is tough because you also probably aren't getting a draft pick getting top 100. It could happen. Sometimes it happens, but picking 13th is not super likely. So you're talking about Brennan, who, if everything goes right and the guy's really popping, he might have exhausted his standing by that point. So that's the only thing that kind of holds me back. But yeah, I mean, okay, so let's say Brennan's killing it and he doesn't count as this, but you got 4 other guys, right? Are we going to quibble on that? Like, to me, that's basically 5 top 100 prospects.
Yeah.
I think it's possible. Cade Horton could really pop. Frankly, Jordan Wicks could pop. Like, this is a guy that picked up 3 different pitches last year and started to show really good stuff. He's already in AA. He could be a top 100 guy pretty easily. The other guys that you mentioned, I think, are as well. So yeah, I mean, we could see Christian Hernandez go nuclear too. He's looked really, really good in the offseason. So yeah, man, I think that's good. I think. Did you mention Triantos? Because
I did not even
maybe
mention
I'm the Triantos guy, but
you're already the Triantos guy. Get out of here.
Yeah,
you're already the Triantos.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Right. Did I say maybe? That's kind of funny. But that's a guy that had a whole bunch of hype, and he went into last year and he showed you exactly what I think a lot of people were worried about, a little bit more on the lower end, which is this guy makes a ton of contact. He's going to get into pro ball and keep trying to make contact on everything. He has never faced 24-year-olds from the Rays system who can put a slider on the outside corner. That, yeah, you want to foul off, but a lot of times you don't really want to swing at that stuff. And he was still making contact and hitting the ball. It just was soft singles or rolling over to the second baseman. That's the big step he needs to make. And he still has that Nick York type top 100 potential. What he needs to do is what Nick York started to do, which is shrink the zone and then continue to let those skills actually play up. And yeah, there's some Baseball America stuff that they're just so convinced he can't play defense. Just whatever. I've heard that. Baseman. Yeah, a first baseman only prospect. I mean, whatever. Baseball America is great. I still subscribe to it. I just that there's some mind blowing stuff in that chat. I'm not here to knock it. I think people should subscribe to it, but yeah, I don't think he's a first baseman. And so that's a guy that he could just have like a Nick York ascension and boom, there's a top 100 guy. So the whole benefit of this, and I know we've alluded to this in many other chats and discussions, and even what you just basically said is this group used to be so built on here's your top few guys. That's it. And now you could throw a dart and say that guy's going to break out, and you wouldn't be necessarily wrong. And that's really fun.
I love that. And I guess I'll twist it and look at it one more way here. Yep. So if we're under the assumption, I mean, right now the Cubs have essentially 3 top 100 guys in Brennan Davis, PCA, and Kevin Alcantara. I know that Kevin Alcantara, we're not really seeing him on all the top 100 lists and stuff like that, but it's essentially 3 top 100 guys. So at that point, to reach this New Year's resolution, you just need to add 2 more guys. And can you see, I mean, can you take a look at these 4 pitchers that I've kind of listed off with Jordan Wicks, Cade Horton, Ben Brown, and Daniel Palencia? If we can add 2 of those guys, there's your 5 top 100 guys, not even to mention the Triantoses and Hernandez and Casey's of the world. Like, I think the Cubs can get 2 of these 4 pitchers into top 100 prospect stats. And that's what makes the argument and the resolution easier for me to put out there.
Yep. I completely agree. Man, I love it. Those are some great resolutions. That's some primo stuff.
And as far as everybody out there listening, like, we'd love to hear your resolutions, whether it's for individuals in the system, a la Matt Mervis and DJ Herz, or whether it's system-wide resolutions as far as top prospects or positional groups and things like that. Send in your resolutions to us. You can tweet at me at Out of the Vines. You can tweet at Greg at Ivy Futures. You can comment on this on Northside Bound. You can, in whatever way you want to get a hold of us, you can rip us. You can add in your own resolutions. We want to hear them. I think that, like, this is a good time of the year to kind of do this type of work. You know, I think that kind of, it's a good time to reflect on the year that was, and it's a good timing to look into the future and look into the year ahead. So we want to hear all you guys' thoughts. Zumac, I'll kick it to you to do some plugging of yourself.
Yeah, you know, again, thanks for listening to the 4th episode. You'll be seeing me on a bunch of future ones, pun intended, I suppose. But yeah, you can find me at Ivy Futures, which is what Greg just said. I'm a writer at Northside Bound, along with Greg Huss, Todd Johnson. We've got a few other writers on there too, which is really exciting. And yeah, just hit me up online. We do have a Discord channel as well, because you never know what's going to happen with Twitter these days. And I'm pretty active on a few other places as well, including Virginia's fantastic Facebook group, which is, I think, Cubs Top Prospects as well. So yeah, just hit me up wherever, but always happy to talk Cubs prospects, MLB draft. And then, yeah, you'll be seeing some MLB draft stuff coming up for me fairly soon, right around this time. Potentially my first mock draft 1.0 coming up. Yeah, if I can just kind of get some time to wrap up a few of the picks, I think I'll feel pretty good about it. And then hopefully my rankings sometime in the early winter as well.
Sweet. And last thing I'll say is thank you guys for subscribing. Thank you guys for listening. If you want to subscribe in all the places possible, over at Apple, over on Spotify, all that good stuff, please leave a rating and review. We'll always accept those, even if the review is, hey, improve upon this. We're still new. We're still figuring this out. We'll take any criticism you guys have. And be sure to subscribe over at the YouTube page, right? So I know that I'm posting all these episodes over on the YouTube page. I'm also coming out with videos every once in a while. I've been running down my top 40 prospects in the Cubs system over on YouTube. I've been going 10 guys at a time and digging in a little bit deeper. I know, Greg, you and I kind of dug in on episode 2 of Cubs on Deck into our prospect list, but I've been digging a little bit deeper into every single player on my top 40. So be sure to go check those out. They're shorter videos, like 10 to 15 minute videos, a little easier for you guys to consume. So go subscribe to the YouTube page. We're trying to grow that a little bit more. And you can find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. But besides that, thank you guys so much for listening. And we will talk to you and be back in your ears in 2 short weeks. Thanks, guys.